It started with a text on the 23rd of December, right before the first snow stuck to the roads, the kind of dry Midwest flurry that comes with just enough silence to let you hear your own thoughts loud and clear. The message came in while I was wrapping a scarf for Mom, navy with gold thread, the kind she used to call classy before Caleb started gifting her designer handbags. The phone buzzed once, screen lighting up like it always did when something inconvenient arrived at just the wrong moment. I picked it up expecting some logistical nonsense. Maybe Dad forgot how to use the oven again. Maybe Tessa was asking if I was bringing gluten-free rolls. But it wasn't that. It was just one sentence. No greeting. No explanation. No joke. Just Caleb's voice, crystal clear in a typed line. Only winners deserve a seat. I read it twice before I realized I wasn't misunderstanding it, that he wasn't trying to be funny or dramatic or ironic in some smug, brotherly way. He meant it. It was an actual disinvitation to Christmas. Not a suggestion, not a miscommunication. A statement of policy, straight from his goddamn mountain of self-righteous delusion. I stood in the kitchen, wrapping paper sliding off the counter, tape stuck to my sweater, and I felt nothing for a full minute. Not anger. Not sadness. Just the cold tickle of recognition, the way you feel when someone finally shows you who they've been all along, and it clicks in your stomach like a deadbolt. I wasn't surprised. That's the real insult of it. I wasn't even surprised. You need to understand, Caleb didn't always talk like that. At least, not out loud. Growing up, he was the star quarterback, the prom king, the kid who could screw up and still get praised just for trying. I was the quiet one, the kid who read under the bleachers, the daughter who didn't cause trouble but also didn't impress anyone. Our parents, Ron and Deb, acted like they had birthed the second coming of Steve Jobs and Tom Brady all rolled into one blonde-haired, smug-grinned asshole. And somehow, they treated me like the off-brand stocking stuffer from a dollar store bin. Still, I loved them all. I didn't cause waves. I built my own life quietly, brick by brick. Got a degree in biomedical systems. Started freelancing in tech development for niche medical firms. And when the contracts got bigger, I still didn't tell anyone. I didn't buy a Tesla. I didn't post success quotes. I didn't even get a bigger apartment. I just started helping. Quietly. Privately. Because I thought that's what family does. When Caleb got laid off 5 years ago, he spun it like a strategic pivot while crying to me on the phone. I never told anyone, not even Nadine. I covered his mortgage. Not once. Not twice. Every damn month for 3 years. Automatically. No questions asked. Just put the payment through and let him keep the house so the neighbors wouldn't whisper. When Tessa called me, crying in a locked bathroom because their daughter Ava didn't get into public gifted programs, I wrote the check for that godforsaken private school. 48 grand. Gone. No thank you card. Not even a plant. The thing is, I never wanted praise. I wanted peace. I wanted a family that didn't collapse the minute appearances weren't upheld. And I thought, stupidly I guess, that if I kept being useful, if I kept solving the cracks before they split open, maybe they'd start seeing me. Not as the girl with the weird career or the one who never married or the one who bought her own Christmas gifts just to fill out the tree. Just me. Elena. The daughter who showed up. The sister who paid attention. But this? This line? That single goddamn sentence? Only winners deserve a seat. That was the knife. I didn't respond. I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't call Mom or Dad to clarify. I just walked over to the couch, sat down, and let the silence wrap itself around me. The kind of silence that comes when you stop pretending. When you realize the calls, the dinners, the favors, you weren't a sister. You were an investor. And he had the audacity to think he owned the damn company. An hour later, I got a Christmas card in the mail. Fancy, expensive stock paper. Gold foil edges. Caleb, Tessa, and Ava smiling on a ski slope like they were born into royalty. The back had one of those sickly sweet updates. Caleb's podcast was gaining traction. Tessa was thriving in her wellness coaching. Ava was exploring violin. No mention of job loss. No mention of missed payments. Just the curated lies of people who think appearances are the same thing as happiness. I stared at the card for a long while, then reached for my laptop. Opened my banking app. Scrolled down to the scheduled transactions list. There it was, sitting neatly with its little monthly recurrence badge. Mortgage payment. Caleb Morris. 3 years, every month. Almost $2,000. I hovered over the cancel button for maybe 3 seconds. Then I clicked it. Simple as that. No anger. No speech. Just a quiet end to a secret I'd kept too long. I went back to wrapping presents. I poured a glass of red wine. And I thought, for the first time in a long time, about what it means to be a winner and who's been paying the entry fee for everyone else's seat at the table. There's something strange about watching your own life happen in the background while someone else takes center stage, especially when that someone is your little brother who has never once opened a door for himself without someone else greasing the hinges behind it. I don't say that out of bitterness, at least not entirely. I say it because I've lived it, from the moment I could understand the word potential and realized it would never be used to describe me in front of our parents. Caleb was the golden boy from the first A he brought home in 3rd grade, the one Dad told everyone would run things someday, and that meant the rest of us, me, were expected to fall in line and clap from the sidelines while he strutted across the stage built from all our silent sacrifices. When I was 14, I designed a working heart monitor for a school science project. I wired it to a shoebox full of old electronics and programmed it to send signals to a repurposed pager I'd bought for $5 at a garage sale. I was proud of it. My science teacher called my parents to tell them she'd never seen a student with such drive. My dad said, "That's nice," and then spent the next hour bragging about how Caleb's JV football coach was already talking about moving him up to varsity. That was the first time I realized I could cure cancer, and it wouldn't matter unless I did it while wearing a jersey with my name on the back. So I stopped talking. I stopped trying to win the game I was never invited to play. Instead, I worked. I studied. I graduated early, then again. I built my career from the ground up with no fanfare, no debt, no applause. I started a consulting firm focused on optimizing software for diagnostic medical devices, which is a long and boring way of saying I made hospitals' technology suck less. And I got good at it. So good that within 5 years I had clients in 5 countries and more money in the bank than anyone in my family would believe. But I didn't tell them. Not because I was hiding, but because I'd learned early that sharing made me smaller in their eyes, not bigger. Success without a spotlight wasn't real to them. If you didn't post it, preach it, or print it on a bumper sticker, it didn't count. Meanwhile, Caleb was bouncing from startup to startup, always talking a big game, always dressed like a damn TED Talk. He'd show up at family dinners in blazers he couldn't afford, quoting Gary Vee and calling himself an entrepreneur in residence at a co-working space that cost more in coffee than in rent. And every time something fell apart, and it always did, it was never his fault. It was the market or the team or bad timing. And somehow, someway, he always landed on his feet. Except he didn't. I did the landing for him. And I did it quietly. I remember the first time I paid one of his bills. He'd called in the middle of the night, said he was behind and just needed to get through the month. I told him I'd send something over, and I did. I told myself it was a one-time thing, but you know how those go. One-time things have a way of becoming traditions when the person asking never learns to stand on their own. He said thank you, then never brought it up again. Next month, same story. Month after that, he didn't even ask. I just sent it. That's when it stopped being charity and started being expectation. What stung worse than the money was the show he kept putting on. He'd gift our parents these big, performative experiences, weekend getaways, anniversary cruises, luxury spa gift cards, and never once did they wonder how he could afford it while unemployed for months at a time. Never once did they question why their son, who hadn't held a steady job in years, was paying for a hotel suite with ocean views. You know who was footing the bill? Me. Not directly, not every time, but close enough. Because when they couldn't cover the balance, it was me they called. Not to scold him. No, of course not. To bail them out, with that soft voice mom uses when she's pretending she's not asking for anything too big. For 8 straight months last year, I paid their property taxes because Caleb said he'd take care of it and then forgot. 8 months, that's almost a year. I mean, technically, it's 8/12 of a year, which is, what, like 75%? Close enough, right? Anyway, no one noticed. They just assumed everything was fine because the lights stayed on and the tax man didn't knock. The kicker came when Caleb started posting these motivational videos online, calling himself a mindset strategist and telling people how to monetize their value. I nearly threw my phone when I watched him say, "If you want to be a real winner, you cut the dead weight." No exceptions. Dead weight. That's what I was to him. Not the sister who kept his daughter in school or his house off the foreclosure list. Just a faceless source of stability, a resource to extract and discard. Last night, he posted again. Same smug face, same bullshit caption. "If you're not grinding, don't come around my table." It got over 200 likes, most from people who don't know he hasn't had a job in over a year. I saw the post while sitting in my kitchen with a bowl of lentil soup and an unpaid invoice from a hospital in Germany waiting in my inbox. I looked at his smile, that little dimple he uses like a weapon, and I didn't feel rage. I felt calm. Cold, sharp, final calm. The kind that tells you the line's been crossed, the silence has expired, and the truth is about to stretch its legs. So I waited. Not because I needed him to fail, but because I knew he already had. He just hadn't figured it out yet. And I was done holding up the illusion. It took exactly 3 weeks for the silence to crack, and when it didn't come with an apology or a moment of clarity. It came with panic, half hidden beneath Caleb's usual swagger, the kind that always wobbled when real life started closing in. He called in the middle of a Thursday, the kind of unexpected mid-morning ring that you know means either someone died or someone needs something, and knowing my brother, death would have been the less complicated option. I answered, pretending I didn't already suspect what this call was really about, letting my voice stay flat and friendly the way it gets when I want someone to underestimate me. "Hey," he said, with the hollow charm he always dusted over stress like cheap cologne. "Weird question. Do you know anything about mortgage payment processing timelines? Mine didn't go through this month. System glitch or something?" He phrased it like a riddle, like he was crowdsourcing a minor tech issue and not quietly losing control of his life. I kept my tone casual, tossed out something vague about holiday banking hours and year-end transitions, and he swallowed it not because he believed me, but because he couldn't bear to admit what he was really afraid of. Caleb never asked the hard questions unless he already had someone to blame for the answer. That day, he had no one but himself. So, naturally, I knew he'd be looking for a scapegoat soon. I hung up and walked into my kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and stared at the dishwasher like it held some kind of ancient wisdom. That call, for all its smoke and mirrors, had confirmed what I already knew. The fallout had begun. I'd stopped the payments, and the dominoes were finally tipping. He just didn't know where they were coming from yet. But Tessa did. It started small, an offhand message asking if I'd heard from Caleb lately, followed by a strangely timed "hope you're doing well" text a few days later. Then came the call where she dropped all pretense and asked, straight out, if I knew anything about a tuition invoice from Ava's school that had suddenly gone unpaid. "You've always been really generous," she said, hesitating the way people do when they're trying to figure out if they're walking into a confession or a trap. "I just wondered if maybe back when things were tighter, you'd helped us out a little. Maybe without telling Caleb." There was a long pause on the line, the kind that practically begs to be filled with a lie, but I didn't give her one. I just said, "Why do you ask?" And in that silence, something shifted. What Tessa didn't know, what no one ever knew, was that Caleb had never asked for help. Not once. Not directly. Every dollar I gave, every payment I made, every favor I pulled, I did that without being prompted, not out of guilt or obligation, but out of strategy. Years ago, during the last recession, he lost a job that I later learned he was fired from for pushing some absurd crypto scheme on his coworkers. The story he gave the family was that the company folded. That lie, like most of his, was more about optics than fact. At the time, our parents were already bragging about him to the neighbors. Dad had just introduced him at church as the next Zuckerberg, and Mom was busy printing out his LinkedIn profile for the fridge, like a middle-aged teen mom clinging to last year's trophies. I saw what was coming and stepped in, not because I believed in him, but because I knew our family's image couldn't handle another crack. I paid off 3 months of his back mortgage, quietly rerouted his overdue electric bill to my own account, and made sure his name never left that school donation plaque where he'd scribbled it next to family sponsor. I covered his disasters because it was easier than watching the people I loved drown in embarrassment. And for a while, it worked. But nothing stays quiet forever, and when the banks came knocking and the tuition letters arrived and the gift-wrapped lies started to unravel, the truth came storming in like a drunk uncle at a wedding, loud, clumsy, and impossible to ignore. Caleb cracked first. Told Dad that some unauthorized transfer issue had caused a mortgage hiccup, then somehow twisted that into a rant about financial instability, followed by the breathtaking accusation that I had caused this by pulling out support too suddenly. As if I were some malfunctioning life raft that owed him eternal buoyancy. Dad called me that night. I hadn't spoken to him since the winner's seat debacle, and his tone was clipped in the way only fathers of golden sons can manage when they realize their favorite child is flailing. He didn't ask if what Caleb said was true. He didn't ask if I was okay. He just said, if you started something, you should have had the decency to keep it going. Family doesn't leave each other high and dry. I felt the laugh bubble up before I could stop it, the kind that sounds more like a cough, sharp and guttural and laced with years of swallowed rage. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I just said, maybe if you'd asked where the money was coming from before, we wouldn't be here now. Then I hung up. 3 days later, Tessa showed up at my apartment. She wasn't dressed like someone coming for a casual visit. Her coat was buttoned tight, her hair was slicked back, and her face wore that expression women get when they've stopped crying but not yet started screaming. She didn't say hi. She didn't sit down. She held out a manila folder with both hands, like it might explode if handled too roughly. Inside were copies, dozens of them. Bank statements, tuition invoices, mortgage payment confirmations. All of them with my name. All of them with my account numbers. She'd gone looking for answers, and now she had them. She looked at me like she didn't know whether to hug me or hit me. And, for the first time in a very long time, I didn't care which it would be. Because the truth was out there now, bleeding quietly through every piece of paper. And no amount of polished family photos or inspirational quotes was going to stitch it back together. There's something almost pathetic about watching a man unravel while still pretending he's spinning gold, like a magician sawing himself in half without realizing the audience already sees the blood pooling beneath the curtain. After Tessa left my apartment that day with the folder clutched against her chest like it was full of nuclear codes, I knew the clock had started ticking on the little empire Caleb had built out of charm, delusion, and other people's money. But I didn't expect the collapse to be so loud or so public. I had always assumed Caleb would at least have the shame to go down in silence, but no, he doubled down like a drowning man kicking at the lifeguard. Tessa didn't say much to me that afternoon. She took the papers, nodded once like something in her snapped into place, and left without slamming the door, which somehow felt worse than if she had. 2 days later, I heard from Nadine, my oldest friend, my accidental spy, that Caleb and Tessa had shown up late to church looking like they'd been caught in a wind tunnel of marital hell. No smiles. No whispers. Just stiff postures and stiff necks, like two statues being dragged into the pews by obligation and fear. And that's when the whispering began, the kind that sticks to wallpaper and carves its way through coffee hour. See, our family's church isn't big, but it's loud in the way small towns always are. Everyone knows each other's business, or thinks they do, and nothing sells faster than the downfall of the people they once envied. For years, Caleb and Tessa had been that couple, the polished, Instagram-filtered faces of young success, with just enough humility to seem relatable. People believed the fiction because it was tidy. He ran startups. She was in wellness. Their kid played violin, for God's sake. No one questioned the source of the money because the story was prettier without it. But when the private school payments stopped and when the Lexus disappeared from the church parking lot, people started noticing the cracks. Tessa, to her credit, didn't protect him this time. According to Nadine, she started answering questions with long, tired silences that made people uncomfortable enough to stop asking. Caleb, on the other hand, imploded. He didn't just deny, he attacked. He accused her of betrayal, told her she'd let his sister emasculate him, as if the real wound wasn't financial, but existential. Like his entire identity had been some house of mirrors I'd apparently shattered with one well-timed truth. When Tessa confronted him about the money, about the years of payments and lies and staged generosity, he told her, "This is verbatim, according to her voicemail to me, that wasn't help, that was manipulation." She wanted control. Control. As if making sure his kid didn't get kicked out of school was some elaborate power grab. As if stopping him from defaulting on his mortgage made me some Bond villain with a spreadsheet fetish. And instead of apologizing or, I don't know, having a single moment of reflection, Caleb launched a podcast. A podcast. Because nothing says humble introspection like recording your own voice explaining why everyone else is wrong. He called it Forge and Rise because of course he did, and made the whole first season about reclaiming identity after betrayal. I listened to the first episode while folding laundry, expecting it to be the usual self-help sludge with buzzwords and empty promises. What I didn't expect was to hear my name, not directly, but clearly enough for anyone who knew us to understand. She thought I needed her, he said, voice smooth and too steady. But I never asked for anything. Not one damn thing. I built my life from scratch, and when people saw that, they got jealous. They tried to rewrite my story to make themselves look bigger. I paused the recording, sat down on the floor with a half-folded towel in my hands, and stared at the wall like it owed me an explanation. He could have taken the L quietly. He could have owned it, healed, even thanked me, God forbid. But no. He rewrote it all, again. And this time, he did it with an audience. That's when something in me changed. Not snapped. Not cracked. Just shifted. A kind of coldness I didn't know I was capable of settled over me, and I opened my laptop with the kind of deliberate motion people use when they're preparing for war. I found the folder. All the records. Every receipt. Every PayPal transfer. Every tuition check and mortgage draft and emergency dental bill that I'd covered when their insurance suddenly lapsed. I didn't even have to dig. It was all there, perfectly dated, perfectly ordinary, quietly damning. I created a blog. Nothing flashy. No names. No dramatic stories. Just screenshots. Payments. Facts. I titled it Built by a Sister's Silence, and the tagline was simple. Some success stories have footnotes you were never meant to read. Then I posted it. Anonymous, untraceable. I sent the link to Nadine, said nothing, and waited. It took less than 48 hours for the first ripple to hit. By day 3, someone posted it in a local Facebook group for parents of Ava's school, and then it hit the small business community board where Caleb used to brag about mentoring new founders. By the end of the week, Forge and Rise had fewer listeners, and more than one comment on his latest post simply read, "Ask your sister." I didn't tell him it was me. I didn't have to. The facts were louder than any confession I could have given. And in the silence that followed, in the crumbling echo of his carefully staged narrative, I finally felt something I hadn't in years. Not revenge. Not pride. Relief. You can always tell when someone's finally fallen because the noise around them changes, not to silence, but to something worse, a kind of brittle echo that no longer reverberates with admiration or envy, but with embarrassment. The week after the blog went live, after those neat little screenshots with all their awkward, undeniable timestamps made the rounds, it wasn't rage or confrontation I received. It was absence. Caleb stopped posting. The podcast episodes were suddenly under review for re-editing. His profile photo changed from a confident headshot to the generic gray placeholder you get when someone either panics or forgets the password. And the comments started piling up, passive at first, then openly mocking, and finally just cold. No one said my name, not directly, and no one needed to. Enough people put the pieces together. Our hometown isn't huge, and the people who once fawned over Caleb's curated success started whispering sideways every time he walked into a room. People who used to nod respectfully at church now looked over his shoulder, and old high school buddies who had once shared his podcast clips began reposting them with snarky captions. Screenshots floated in group chats I wasn't part of but somehow still saw. It was like watching a balloon drift into power lines, inevitable, awkward, and oddly satisfying in a quiet, mean little way. Mom called once, voice sharp like she'd been rehearsing every word. She didn't ask if I was behind the blog, but her tone said she already knew and didn't want to hear me say it out loud. She said, "You've embarrassed the family, Elena." He was struggling, and you made a circus out of it. I didn't respond at first. I let the silence do the talking. Then I said, "I didn't embarrass the family, Mom. I just stopped cleaning up after it." That was the last time we spoke. By the second week, Tessa had packed a bag and left, taking Ava with her and saying she just needed some clarity, which was code for I need to be away from the crash site. She didn't go far, just to her sister's place in Dayton, but it was far enough to make the statement clear. Caleb was alone. Finally, and for the first time in maybe his whole life, there was no one left to spin the narrative for him. No wife smiling through clenched teeth. No parents offering alibis. No sister quietly signing checks in the background. Just him. And the truth. He showed up at my door 5 days later. I knew it was him before I even looked through the peephole. The knock wasn't his usual rhythm. It was slower, heavier, like each hit cost him something. When I opened the door, I almost didn't recognize him. His hair was overgrown, patchy in the way that happens when someone stops caring. His eyes were rimmed red, like he hadn't slept, and his beard, normally trimmed within an inch of its life, had gone feral. He looked less like a fallen mogul and more like a man who'd lost a fight with his own reflection. He didn't ask to come in, just stared for a long moment like he was hoping I'd do the work of starting the conversation for him. I didn't. I waited. And eventually, he asked it. "Why didn't you just say something?" It was such a simple question, so breathtakingly naive, that I almost laughed. But I didn't. I leaned against the doorframe and looked at him the way you look at someone you used to trust, but now only pity. And I answered him honestly. "You told me only winners deserve a seat," I said, my voice low and steady. "I figured you'd be too busy to notice who was feeding you." He flinched, just barely, and for a second I thought he might shout, might throw one last tantrum, might claw for some piece of the stage he'd always felt entitled to. But instead, something inside him just stopped. Like an engine finally seizing up after running on stolen fuel for too long. He didn't cry. He didn't collapse. He just stood there, looking past me into my apartment like it held a version of the life he never earned. And then he sank onto the little step just outside my door and buried his face in his hands, not in dramatic sobs, but in the kind of silence that only comes when denial has finally run out of road. I went inside without inviting him. Made a cup of tea. 1 cup. Then I stood in the doorway, watching him through the glass, and after a minute, I opened it and held the cup out. No words. No forgiveness. Just tea. A gesture. Something human. Not a reunion. Not a resolution. Just an acknowledgement. He took it with both hands like it weighed more than it should, and he didn't say thank you. He just nodded, Eyes still unfocused, mouth too dry for performance. We sat there for a few minutes, him on the step, me in the doorway, and the quiet between us said more than any apology ever could. He knew. Finally. And maybe that was enough. Maybe not. But it was something. I don't know what happens next. I don't know if he finds work or if Tessa comes back or if Ava ever learns the truth about the way her childhood was held together by the silent sacrifice of an invisible aunt. I don't know if my parents ever stop pretending this is just a rough patch or if they double down on the fantasy. I don't even know if Caleb will ever apologize. But I do know this. I didn't destroy him. I just stopped pretending he built himself. Maybe that's worse. Maybe that's justice. You decide.